Hello, listeners, to another podcast episode. This week, I'm going to relate to you an experience of Islamophobia from one of our guests and her thoughts and reflections. So, without any further ado, let's begin. Islam, Hijab, and Violence. Last year, I was working as an environmental fundraiser in a shopping mall. Being the nature of the job, I was required to approach various people and attempt to socialize with them. And in one of those instances, a man in his early 30s was buying bread with his daughter, about 3 or 4 years old. I knelt down to catch the eye of the little girl to wave and smile. Very firmly, this man pulled his daughter away and asked me to step away from his daughter. He said, "We don't mix with Muslims." He knew I was a Muslim because I was wearing the hijab. I was shaken by his words, and they resonated with me for the rest of the day. I couldn't concentrate anymore, nor could I smile like I did before. Right then and there, I had the biggest urge to ask him, "What did I ever do to you?" But I didn't. He could be excused in a way because the only thing he had ever seen about anyone associated with Islam was through a media that was biased. A media that showed a group of people who claimed to be Muslims but did things that God forbade them to do. He probably never had a high school friend named Abdul or a neighbor wearing the hijab. And if he had, he made it quite clear that he would not mix with them. I did some research for my own curiosity to find out why non-Muslims had a prejudice against Islam. Why do some of them associate Islam with battles, wars, and violence? And no, for this research, I didn't look into newspaper articles or breaking news podcasts, because we all know what they sell. For this research, I looked into the books and recordings of scholars to learn the true essence of what this religion is about. I'll share my findings, and together we can answer this question. Is Islam a religion which promotes violence like depicted in the media? The first thing I turned to was the holy book of Islam, the Quran. The Quran, in its essence, never encourages violence. In fact, it propagates peace and pluralism. Multiple verses were revealed for various occasions, such as what to do when there is a dispute with a believer, or how to approach a disbeliever. For example, the Quran tells believers in chapter 8, verse 1, to solve the disputes among themselves by making peace. Another verse, found in chapter 8, verse 61, portrays how the Quran prefers peace even in the middle of a war with enemies, as it states, "And if they, the enemies, incline to peace, incline to it also and put your trust in God." So, the Quran is passionate towards peace, and this passion is not limited to the ways enemies should be treated or how Muslims solve their disputes. For example, on family relationships, we can see through the verse found in chapter 4, verse 128, indicating that peace is better. These multiple verses are just a few examples of the many that prove the Quran to be peace-oriented in various aspects of life. Above all, the aforementioned verses, the following verse proves with no room for doubt that human life is sacred in Islam and violence has no place among the true Muslims. He who kills a soul, unless it be in legal punishment for murder or for causing disorder and corruption on earth, will be as if he had killed all humankind. And he who saves a life will be as if he had saved the lives of all humankind. Chapter 5, verse 32. In fact, Islam is the religion that brought peace to the era of ignorance. This was the era when strength and status meant superiority. There were no human or animal rights. Women were treated like objects that were sold and bought. The more vicious and cruel you were, the stronger you were esteemed and the higher respect you got. And when the message of Islam began to spread, the very first criticism was against human rights, as they could not imagine a life where they could be equal to slaves or value women. In the very early times when Islam emerged, anyone who joined the belief of oneness of God and equality among all living beings were brutally tortured, their property pillaged, or life was threatened, all with the intention of reverting them to their old beliefs. And it was exactly this kind of torturous lifestyle that pushed a group of Muslims to seek refuge in Abyssinia, currently Ethiopia, who was at the time ruled by just Emperor Nugus. The change of lifestyle of Muslims is very well depicted with the words of Jafar ibn Abu Talib, one of the early Muslims who migrated to Abyssinia, who spoke on behalf of Muslims to Nugus. He describes their ignorant state before Islam as people worshipping idols, eating the meat of dead animals, committing all sorts of evil acts, cutting contact with relatives, turning away from neighbors, and oppressing the weak if they were strong. He says they went on with this tyranny until Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, came with God's message telling them to stop worshipping the idols that they made out of gold, silver, stone, and timber. He says that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, invited them to worship the one and only God and urged them to speak the truth, to return the goods that were entrusted to them, to look after their relatives, to love and support their neighbors, and to stay away from sins. And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon them, instructed them not to spill blood, not to commit shameful acts, not to lie, not to misuse the rights of orphans, and not to offend decent and chaste women. These were the things that the messenger brought to the society of that time: to speak the truth, to look after relatives, to love and support neighbors, to not spill blood or commit shameful acts, but instead to be respectful towards all living beings, regardless of your power and strength. These were the things that was asked of a Muslim, not to shed blood. So I don't know where this idea of Islam being violent came from. In fact, in the face of all the tyranny, the order from God was not to retaliate, but to remain peaceful and be patient. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, the messenger, showed them exactly what stance to take and assured them that the most beloved of you to me and the closest of you to me on the day of judgment are the best of you in character. Those among you who talk with affectation are given to boasting, and who offend others with their words and actions will be the most repugnant to me and farthest from me on the day of judgment. Battles during Muhammad's, peace and blessings be upon him, lifetime and their duration. All the battles fought during the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, were in defense. They mainly had no other way to protect their lives or properties, and they were all set as a last resort. Before all the battles, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, sent envoys to the Meccans to propose peace to prevent any bloodshed. In all of the cases, this was rejected by his enemies. The main battles that can be named in the history of Islam are the Battle of Badr, the Battle of Uhud, the Battle of Hunayn, all of which lasted no longer than a week. In fact, Hunayn ended within a matter of hours. The Battle of Khandaq was not actually a battle because even though the Meccan army laid siege around Medina for 15 days, they could not enter the city because of a ditch dug surrounding Medina by the Prophet Muhammad and his companions. So there was no clash and no fatalities. As the well-known Muslim Canadian author and journalist Harun Siddiqui writes, he spent a total of less than a week in actual battle in the 23 years of his prophethood. The reason why Muslims fought was not to conquer lands and get gold, but to defend themselves and live a life free of violence. Yet for some odd reason, it is these battles that ironically lasted very short that the focus of media lays on, rather than other things that the Prophet found detrimental, such as his relations with his family. For some reason, when asked to picture a Muslim of that time, some people always imagine a Badawi, a Bedouin, with a sword in his hand. Is that the real picture we should be having in our heads? A man with a bloody sword in his hand? Was that their lifestyle at the time? How much of their lives did they spend battling others rather than living their religion? My research says very few, and only for self-defense. Yet for some reason it is always the first picture many people have in their heads. Who put that image there? So, I guess what I'm trying to say is, the guy was right to think like that. But the research, the authentic research made on the core of the religion, the Quran and the Messenger, begs to differ. I wish I could see him again and this time have the courage to say, hey, don't I deserve a chance to be investigated before I'm prejudged? What I wear in my head and what I believe in, don't they have a voice? Don't we all deserve to have a chance to speak our beliefs? And doesn't a world religion deserve to be investigated a bit with an impartial look? Thank you again, listeners, for joining us on this week's podcast.